The last time Ranger looked this afraid, Min almost did not make it home. Ethan Walker had not said those words out loud in years, mostly because he spent most days without anybody around to hear them. But standing in the school parking lot that cold November morning, watching his old German Shepherd freeze beside the truck, the memory came back faster than he wanted. Sharp, heavy, familiar. Frost clung to the edges of the windshield while weak Colorado sunlight struggled through low gray clouds hanging over the mountains. Pine trees moved softly in the distance behind the small elementary school, their tops disappearing into mist that had not fully lifted since dawn. Ethan shut the truck door slowly and adjusted the cardboard boxes stacked carefully in his arms. Winter coats, canned food, school supply donations. Nothing dramatic. Just something to do with long, quiet mornings after retirement, stopped feeling like freedom and started feeling like silence. Ranger usually loved these trips. Kids always crowded around him near the front office. Teachers kept dog treats in drawers. The old German Shepherd carried himself like somebody who still remembered purpose. But today felt wrong immediately. Ranger had jumped out of the truck, taken maybe 10 steps toward the school entrance, then stopped completely. No tail movement. No curiosity. No calm. Just stillness. Ethan frowned and looked back toward him. Come on, buddy. Nothing. Ranger stood perfectly still near the curb, ears alert, amber eyes locked toward the backside of the school building where the gymnasium sat apart from the main entrance. The dog barely blinked. Ethan lowered the donation boxes into the truck bed and walked closer. Ranger. Soft voice. Familiar voice. Usually enough. The dog did not move. Not even a little. Instead, Ranger took one slow step forward toward the gym, then stopped again. Watching. Waiting. Ethan felt something uncomfortable settle low in his stomach. He had seen that posture before. Too many times. Ranger used to stand like that overseas before roads nobody trusted. Before buildings nobody wanted to enter. Before silence turned dangerous. No. Ethan muttered quietly to himself. Not here. A school parking lot did not make sense. Nothing about this made sense. Ranger was retired. Old. Slower than before. Sometimes stiff getting into the truck these days. But military dogs did not forget instinct just because time moved forward. Ethan looked across the quiet schoolyard. Children had not fully arrived yet. A few teachers crossed parking spaces carrying coffee cups and canvas bags. Somewhere inside the building a school bell echoed faintly through cold morning air. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Ranger suddenly started moving again. Slow. Purposeful. Straight toward the side path leading behind the gymnasium. Ethan followed immediately. Gravel crunched softly beneath boots while cold wind pushed through bare trees lining the edge of school property. Ranger walked with strange focus now, nose low but eyes constantly lifting toward the building. Not sniffing randomly. Searching. Intentional. Ethan had not seen this side of him in years. Near the back corner of the gym, Ranger stopped abruptly beside an old metal utility grate near the foundation wall. The dog stood there staring, then slowly circled once. Small whine. Low. Uneasy. Ethan crouched carefully beside him. What is it? Ranger pawed lightly once against frozen dirt near the grate, then stepped back and looked directly at Ethan. Waiting. Ethan frowned harder. Old pipes maybe. Animals beneath the building. Electrical equipment. Could be anything. Still, Ranger never reacted without reason. Not like this. Never dramatic. Never random. Just certain. Mr. Walker? Ethan turned quickly. A woman in a blue coat stood several feet away holding coffee and a folder against her chest. Principal Laura Bennett. Mid-50s. Kind smile. Patient voice. Everything okay? Ethan stood slowly. Yeah. Small pause. Probably. He glanced back toward Ranger. He is acting strange. Laura smiled politely. Ranger? She laughed softly. Maybe he smells cafeteria food. Ethan almost smiled back, but could not quite manage it. Ranger never took his eyes off the gym wall. Maybe. Ethan answered quietly. Laura stepped closer and bent slightly toward the dog. Hey, handsome. Usually Ranger greeted people immediately. Today he barely reacted. Just one glance before turning back toward the building. Her smile faded slightly. That is unusual. Ethan nodded once. Yeah. Silence settled briefly. Wind moved across the parking lot carrying the smell of cold concrete and pine. Somewhere inside the school children started arriving louder now, voices echoing through hallways. Ranger suddenly shifted forward again. Alert. Focused. Watching the gym like something invisible stood behind the wall waiting. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck slowly. He has only acted like this before. He stopped himself. Laura looked curious. Before what? Ethan looked back toward Ranger. Toward the frozen expression he had not seen since deployment years ago. Before bad things, he answered quietly. Ranger suddenly let out a low, uneasy sound deep in his throat and stepped closer to the building again. Then stopped, waiting, like he refused to leave. And for reasons Ethan could not explain, he suddenly did not feel right leaving either. The next morning arrived colder than expected, the kind of Colorado cold that settled into old wood and quiet parking lots before sunrise had fully stretched across the mountains. Thin frost covered Ethan Walker's truck while pale silver lights spilled across empty streets leading toward Pine Ridge Elementary. Ranger had barely slept. Ethan knew because neither had he. All night the old German shepherd paced slowly between the front window and the door, restless in ways Ethan had not seen since overseas. Not loud. Not nervous exactly. Focused. Uneasy. Like something unfinished waited somewhere they had not reached yet. Around 3 a.m, Ethan finally gave up trying to sleep and sat quietly at the kitchen table nursing cold coffee while Ranger lay near the door without closing his eyes once. "You are too old for this," Ethan muttered softly, rubbing tired hands together. Ranger lifted his head briefly. Watching. Waiting. Ethan sighed. "Or maybe I am." Retirement had made silence louder than expected. After 20 years moving through missions, planning routes, protecting people, ordinary life felt strangely hollow. Most mornings now felt the same. Coffee, quiet house, ranch chores, occasional volunteer work. Too much thinking, too much remembering. But something about yesterday stayed with him. That look in Ranger's eyes near the gymnasium. The same look before dangerous roads overseas. Before buildings nobody trusted. Before instinct quietly whispered something machines had not found yet. Ethan grabbed his keys around 7:30. "One quick stop," he said quietly. "Then breakfast." Ranger stood immediately. No hesitation. No stiffness from old age this time. Tail low. Purposeful. Like he had been waiting for permission all night. The school parking lot slowly filled with cars by the time they arrived. Parents carrying backpacks. Teachers balancing coffee and folders. School buses sighing softly beside the curb while children hurried through cold morning air wrapped in oversized jackets and winter hats. Everything looked normal again. Too normal. Ranger stepped from the truck and immediately pulled toward the side of the school. Same direction as yesterday. Same quiet urgency. Ethan followed without fighting it this time. "Okay," he muttered. "Show me." Near the gymnasium, Ranger stopped again beside the same utility area near the back wall. Nose low. Ears forward. Small, uneasy sound in his throat. Then he circled once. Twice. Pawed lightly near frozen ground again. Ethan crouched carefully beside him. Still nothing obvious. No strange smell. No sound. No visible damage. Just old pipes. Cement walls. Utility vents humming softly beneath cold wind. A janitor carrying tools stopped nearby and frowned politely. "Everything all right there?" Ethan stood slowly. "Maybe," he answered. "Has anything been wrong around the gym lately?" The man shrugged. "Old building." Small laugh. "Something always breaks." He adjusted his jacket against the cold. "Maintenance team has been behind for months." Ethan glanced back toward Ranger. Something tightened quietly in his chest. Before he could ask another question, Ranger suddenly stiffened again. Completely still now. Eyes locked toward a side entrance near the gym doors. Low, uneasy sound again. Not aggression. Warning. Ethan knew the difference too well. "Easy," he whispered softly. Principal Laura Bennett appeared again carrying folders against her coat. "Back already?" she asked with gentle surprise. Ethan nodded once. Could not stop thinking about yesterday. He hesitated. "Laura, I know this sounds strange." She smiled politely though curiosity crossed her face. "Go ahead." Ethan looked toward Ranger again. "Has anything unusual happened near the gym recently? Electrical problems? Smells? Heating issues?" Laura frowned slightly. "Nothing serious." Then paused. "Well," Ethan waited. "A few teachers mentioned weird temperature changes last week," she admitted. "Gym gets cold suddenly." Small shrug. "Old buildings do strange things." Ranger suddenly moved forward again, stopping directly near the locked gym doors and refusing to step away. Students nearby slowed down now, watching curiously. One little boy around 10 years old stood near the sidewalk, staring openly at Ranger. "Why is he doing that?" the boy asked quietly. Ethan looked down. "I wish I knew." The boy stepped closer carefully. He looked scared. Honest observation. Ethan glanced toward Ranger again. Scared was not the right word. Alert. Worried. Certain. Yes. But not scared. Ranger had walked through things most people could never imagine and still somehow stayed gentle. "He usually acts different?" the boy asked. Ethan nodded once. "Very different." The child looked toward the gym thoughtfully. "Maybe he is trying to tell you something." Ethan almost smiled. Funny how children said things adults stopped believing. Before he answered, Ranger suddenly planted himself directly in front of the gym entrance and refused to move completely. No command worked. No quiet encouragement. Just stillness. Waiting. Watching. Like he would rather stand there forever than let anyone ignore whatever his instincts kept pointing toward. Ethan exhaled slowly and looked toward the building again. Cold wind pushed across the parking lot while children laughed somewhere near the playground. Everything looked safe. Everything sounded ordinary. Yet deep down, something did not feel ordinary anymore. And if Ranger trusted his instincts enough to come back twice, Ethan knew one thing for certain. He could not ignore them either. Before we go further, please take a moment to like and subscribe so you do not miss more unforgettable stories like this one. Because sometimes, the quietest warnings matter the most. That afternoon refused to leave Ethan Walker alone. Even after he drove back to his small ranch house outside town, something about the school stayed with him the way cold weather settled into old bones long after winter passed. The mountains looked darker than usual beneath low clouds pressing heavily across the horizon. Wind moved through tall pine trees, surrounding the property with a sound almost like whispering. Ranger had not relaxed once since leaving Pine Ridge Elementary. The old German shepherd skipped dinner completely. That alone unsettled Ethan more than he wanted to admit. Ranger never skipped food. Not after missions. Not after storms. Not even after long days working ranch trails. But tonight the dog paced slowly between the front window and the back door again, stopping every few minutes to stare toward town. Watching. Waiting. Listening for something Ethan could not hear. "All right," Ethan finally muttered while setting untouched dog food aside. "Something is bothering you." Ranger paused near the kitchen table, ears twitching slightly before turning back toward the dark window. Outside, early snow drifted lightly beneath porch lights. Quiet. Peaceful. Nothing looked wrong. Ethan leaned against the counter, rubbing tired hands together. Retirement had not made life easier the way people promised. Most days simply stretched longer than they used to. Too quiet. Too much room for old memories. Too much silence between mornings and sleep. The only steady thing left was Ranger. Through deployments. Through grief. Through the long, lonely months after Ethan lost both his marriage and military routine within the same year. Ranger stayed. Even now. Old. Slower. Graying around the muzzle. Yet somehow still carrying purpose stronger than most people Ethan knew. Around midnight, Ethan woke suddenly to the sound of soft movement near the bedroom door. Ranger stood there. Awake again. Waiting. The dog walked halfway down the hallway, then stopped and looked back. Ethan frowned. No, Ranger waited, then walked farther toward the front door. Ethan sighed heavily and threw a flannel shirt over his shoulders. You better have a reason for this. Outside, cold mountain air hit immediately. Frost glittered beneath moonlight across the driveway, while distant wind moved softly through pine branches. Ranger stepped onto the porch and stared toward town again, toward the direction of the school. Completely still. Ethan stood beside him longer than he meant to. Something about the moment felt wrong in ways difficult to explain. Not fear exactly. More like unfinished concern. Like a sentence somebody stopped speaking halfway through. The next morning arrived gray and colder. Ranger stood by the truck before Ethan even grabbed his coffee. Waiting. No hesitation. Ethan looked down at him for a long second. You really want to go back? Ranger blinked once. Ethan shook his head slowly. Fine. Pine Ridge Elementary looked busier today. School buses lined the front curb. Children hurried through the cold, carrying oversized backpacks, while parents rushed through drop-off lines. Somewhere near the playground, a whistle blew while teachers waved students indoors. Ordinary. Safe. Familiar. Yet Ranger barely looked at any of it. Straight toward the gym again. Same path. Same urgency. Ethan followed quietly. Near the side entrance, Ranger froze once more beside the utility area, nose low, watching. Then suddenly a low sound escaped his throat again. Not aggressive, concerned. Ethan crouched beside him. Still here, huh? Your dog back again? A voice asked nearby. Ethan turned. Same janitor from yesterday stood carrying a toolbox. Tired eyes. Heavy jacket zipped halfway. Yeah, Ethan admitted. Something has him worked up. The man looked toward Ranger and shrugged. Funny thing, he lowered his voice slightly. Heating system around the gym has been weird lately. Ethan straightened slowly. Weird how? Smells sometimes, the janitor said. Then nothing. Small shrug. Maintenance keeps putting it off. Ranger suddenly stepped closer to a vent near the foundation wall. Sniffed once, twice, then backed away sharply. Ethan felt his stomach tighten again. What kind of smell? Hard to explain, the man answered. Metal maybe. Before Ethan could ask more, Principal Laura Bennett approached carrying folders again. She looked concerned now instead of curious. Everything all right? Ethan hesitated, then decided honesty mattered more than sounding unreasonable. Laura, he said carefully, I think something may actually be wrong here. Her expression shifted slightly. Because of Ranger? Ethan nodded once. I know how this sounds. He glanced down at the dog. But he has never acted like this without reason. Laura looked uncertain, polite, careful, the kind of expression people wore when they wanted to believe somebody without fully knowing how. Before she answered, a small voice interrupted quietly nearby. I think he is trying to protect us. Ethan turned. Same boy from yesterday stood near the gym doors holding his backpack close. Ben Miller. Quiet eyes, nervous posture, but completely serious. Ranger looked toward the boy for the first time all morning and slowly walked over, sitting calmly beside him. Ethan frowned slightly. Ranger did not warm up to strangers quickly anymore, especially children he had just met. Ben reached down carefully, hand trembling slightly. Ranger allowed it. No hesitation, just quiet trust. He keeps looking at the building, Ben whispered, like he wants people to stay away. Wind moved softly through the empty side yard. Somewhere inside the school, a bell rang, signaling first period. Children disappeared into classrooms. The gym sat strangely quiet beside them. Still, cold, watching. And for reasons Ethan could not explain, he suddenly realized he no longer felt comfortable pretending this was nothing. The rest of the morning settled over Pine Ridge Elementary like an ordinary day, pretending nothing unusual existed beneath it. Children moved through hallways carrying backpacks too large for their shoulders. Teachers crossed between classrooms balancing folders and coffee cups while cold November sunlight pushed weakly through classroom windows. Yet near the gymnasium, Ranger refused to relax. Ethan Walker stood quietly beside him, hands buried deep in the pockets of his old flannel jacket while wind drifted through the narrow space behind the building. Ranger had not moved more than 10 feet from the side entrance in almost an hour. Every few minutes the old German shepherd shifted slightly, staring toward the same utility area near the foundation wall before glancing anxiously at the gym doors. Then back again, like he was waiting for someone to finally listen. Ethan knew that looked too well now. Principal Laura Bennett folded her arms against the cold and stood beside him. I want to believe you, she admitted quietly. I really do. Ethan nodded once. I know. She glanced toward Ranger. But I cannot shut down a school because your dog feels uneasy. Her voice stayed gentle, careful, not dismissive, just practical. Ethan understood. He probably would have said the same thing years ago if somebody else had stood in front of him making the same argument. Yet nothing about this felt normal anymore. Laura, he said carefully, lowering his voice. Ranger worked military detection for years. He paused. Explosives. Hazards. Things people missed. She looked surprised. You never mentioned that. Ethan gave a tired shrug. Does not come up much. Ranger suddenly stood, ears alert again. He stepped toward the gym doors and stopped completely. One low, uneasy sound escaped his throat. Quiet. Persistent. Laura looked at him longer this time. Her expression shifted from polite uncertainty to concern she was trying not to show. What exactly do you think is wrong? Ethan exhaled slowly. I do not know. Honest answer. That is what bothers me. Before either could speak again, the school custodian from earlier approached carrying a metal clipboard. He hesitated slightly when he saw them still standing there. You folks still on this? He asked awkwardly. Laura looked toward him. Tom, Have there been any recent repair reports around the gym? Tom scratched the side of his beard. Heating issues mostly. Small pause. Strange smells sometimes. Ethan looked up immediately. You mentioned that earlier. Tom nodded slowly. Sort of metallic. He shifted uncomfortably. A few weird sounds under the floor too. Pipes maybe. Laura frowned. Why was I not told? Tom shrugged apologetically. Maintenance budget. The answer landed heavier than anyone wanted it to. Old buildings learned how to hide problems when money ran thin. Ranger suddenly moved forward sharply now, not running, not barking wildly, just urgently stepping between Ethan and the gym doors. Then he turned and looked directly at Ethan. Waiting. Eyes steady. Certain. Ethan felt something cold settle deeper inside him. He is trying to tell me something, he said quietly. Laura hesitated. You really believe that? Ethan looked down at Ranger. I trust him more than most people. Silence followed. Wind scraped dry leaves across pavement nearby. Somewhere inside the school, laughter echoed faintly through hallways. Safe sounds. Ordinary sounds. Yet Ethan noticed something now that he had not before. Near the side vent beside the gym foundation, there was a faint smell. Strange. Hard to describe. Not strong. Almost hidden beneath cold air. Metallic maybe. Slightly chemical. Easy to ignore unless somebody stood still long enough. Ranger backed away from it again immediately. Ethan crouched beside the vent carefully. You smell that? He asked quietly. Laura stepped closer and frowned slightly. Maybe. Tom rubbed the back of his neck. That is the smell I mentioned. Ethan stood slowly again. Every instinct military life had drilled into him quietly stirred awake. Nothing dramatic. Just wrong. Enough wrong to matter. Laura, he said carefully. When is the school assembly tomorrow? 10 in the morning, she answered. Whole school in the gym. Ethan looked toward Ranger again. The dog stood frozen now, eyes locked toward the building with a focus that made Ethan uncomfortable in ways difficult to explain. Not panic. Certainty. I think somebody should check this before then, Ethan said quietly. Laura hesitated longer this time. Emergency inspection? She asked uncertainly. Because of a smell and a dog? Ethan nodded once. I know how that sounds. Small pause. But I would rather feel foolish than regret ignoring this. Tom shifted awkwardly beside them. Honestly, he glanced toward the vent. Something has felt off for a while. Laura pressed her lips together thoughtfully. The weight of responsibility settled visibly across her face now. Hundreds of kids, teachers, staff, ordinary people trusting the building around them to simply work the way buildings should. Ranger took another slow step backward from the gym doors and sat beside Ethan again. Calm now. Watching. Waiting. Like he had done everything he could and the next choice belonged to humans. Laura finally sighed. I will make some calls, she said quietly. No promises. Ethan nodded once. That is enough. But even as they stood there, cold wind moving softly across the schoolyard, Ethan noticed something that unsettled him more than before. Ranger still had not relaxed. Not even a little. And somewhere deep down, Ethan suddenly feared they were already running out of time. The next morning arrived carrying the kind of cold that made people hurry indoors without thinking twice. Thin clouds covered the mountains surrounding Pine Ridge, and pale sunlight struggled to push through gray skies hanging low over town. Ethan Walker had barely slept. Ranger had not either. The old German shepherd spent most of the night pacing quietly between the front door and kitchen window again, stopping every few minutes to stare toward town as though something unfinished still waited near the school. Ethan had finally stopped pretending this feeling would pass. Around 7:30, Ranger stood beside the truck before Ethan even reached for his coat. Focused. Waiting. No hesitation. You already know where we are going, Ethan muttered quietly. Ranger stepped forward immediately. By the time they reached Pine Ridge Elementary, the school parking lot was alive with morning movement. Parents hurried children toward entrances while buses lined the curb. Teachers carried stacks of papers and warm coffee cups through sharp morning air. Ordinary. Busy. Safe. Yet Ethan noticed something strange immediately. Ranger did not even glance toward the front entrance today. Straight toward the gym again. Faster this time. More urgent. Ethan followed quickly. Near the side entrance, Ranger stopped hard enough to nearly pull the leash from Ethan's hand. Ears alert. Body tense. Eyes locked on the gym doors. Then came the sound Ethan had feared most. A low, uneasy whine deep in the dog's throat. Not panic. Not fear. Warning. Ethan crouched beside him. Still here, he whispered quietly. Ranger stepped closer to the wall near the vent again, sniffed once, then backed away immediately. Ethan caught the faint metallic smell stronger now. Subtle. Strange. Easy to miss if somebody was not looking for it, but impossible to ignore once noticed. Principal Laura Bennett hurried across the side, lot wearing a long winter coat and carrying her phone tightly in one hand. Concern sat openly across her face now. I made calls, she said before Ethan even asked. Maintenance cannot get here until this afternoon. Ethan looked toward the gym. What about the assembly? Laura hesitated. 10 o'clock. Small pause. Whole school. Ranger shifted forward suddenly, planting himself directly near the side gym doors, refusing to move. Laura watched him quietly. He has been like this all morning? Since yesterday, Ethan answered. Before Laura could respond, a school staff member stepped outside carrying folding chairs toward the gym entrance. Ranger stood immediately, blocking the path without aggression but refusing to step aside. The woman stopped awkwardly. Ethan quickly moved forward. Sorry, but Ranger would not budge, just stared toward the building. Watching. Waiting. That is strange, the woman said nervously. He usually loves people. Ethan nodded once. Yeah. Laura folded her arms against the cold. The inspection company said they could maybe send someone later if another emergency cancels. Ethan exhaled slowly. Later. Something about that word felt wrong. Too slow. Too uncertain. Ranger suddenly turned sharply and looked directly at Ethan again. Then back toward the gym. Then Ethan. Again. Like he was pleading now. Ethan knew that behavior. Military dogs communicated in patterns. Small signals. Clear signals if somebody paid attention long enough. Ranger was not confused. He was insisting. Laura. Ethan said carefully, voice lower now. I think you need to delay the assembly. Her face tightened immediately. Ethan, I know. He held up one hand gently. I know how ridiculous this sounds. He looked toward Ranger. But he has never once reacted like this without reason. Wind moved cold air through the narrow side yard, while distant voices echoed from classrooms nearby. Somewhere inside the gym, Ethan heard movement. Folding chairs. Equipment. Preparation. Hundreds of children would soon gather there. Ranger suddenly backed farther away from the building than before and sat firmly beside Ethan's leg. Unmoving. Refusing even to look away now. Laura pressed her lips together tightly. The weight of responsibility settled visibly across her face. If I cancel assembly and nothing is wrong. She began quietly. Ethan nodded once. People will complain. Small pause. But if something is wrong, neither finished the sentence. They did not have to. Before Laura could answer, Tom the custodian appeared near the corner carrying his toolbox faster than usual. His face looked uneasy. Laura, he said quietly, slightly out of breath. There is definitely something weird going on under the gym. Both turned immediately. What do you mean? Laura asked. Tom rubbed the back of his neck nervously. Heating system pressure keeps acting strange. He hesitated. And the smell is stronger today. Ranger stood immediately, ears forward, focused harder than ever. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. You checked underneath? Tom nodded slowly. Only briefly. Small pause. Something does not feel right. Wind pushed sharply across the parking lot, while students continued arriving unaware, just yards away. Ethan looked toward the gym doors again, then toward Ranger, then back at Laura. Please, he said quietly now. Just buy some time. Laura stared at the building longer this time. Longer than before. Fear finally replacing uncertainty. Somewhere inside the school, the first warning bell rang softly through the cold morning air. And suddenly, for the first time since all this started, Ethan realized something terrifying. Whatever Ranger felt, it was getting worse. Laura Bennett stood completely still for several seconds, cold wind pressing softly against her coat, while the school around them continued moving through an ordinary morning that suddenly no longer felt ordinary. Children laughed somewhere near the front entrance. Teachers crossed sidewalks carrying lesson plans. Inside the gym, folding chairs scraped faintly against polished floors as staff prepared for the school assembly scheduled to begin in less than an hour. Everything looked normal, safe, familiar. Yet Ranger remained planted near Ethan Walker's side, tense in a way that now felt impossible to dismiss. Cancel the assembly, Ethan said quietly again. No pressure in his voice. No panic. just certainty shaped by years of trusting instinct when instinct made no logical sense, yet somehow kept people alive. Laura exhaled slowly. Fear and responsibility crossed her face together. "Tom," she said carefully, turning toward the custodian, "I need you to shut the gym down for now." Tom blinked once. "Seriously?" "Just temporarily," Laura answered quickly. "Until somebody checks underneath." Tom hesitated only a second before nodding. "All right." He disappeared through the side entrance, carrying his toolbox faster than before. Laura pulled out her phone immediately. "I am calling emergency maintenance." Ethan nodded once, though something deep inside still refused to settle. Ranger had not relaxed. Not even slightly. If anything, the old German shepherd looked more uneasy than before. Like waiting itself had become dangerous. 10 minutes later, confusion slowly spread through the school. Teachers redirected students away from the gym, while whispers moved quietly between classrooms. Parents dropping off late children noticed unusual movement near the building. Nobody knew much yet, just enough to feel unsettled. Ethan stayed near the side entrance with Ranger while maintenance trucks finally pulled into the parking lot. 2 technicians stepped out carrying equipment bags, looking mildly irritated in the way people often did when called for emergencies they assumed would turn into nothing. One older technician adjusted his jacket and frowned toward the building. "What exactly are we looking for?" Laura hesitated. Ethan stayed quiet. Tom answered instead. "Strange smell. Heating issues. Weird pressure readings." Small pause. "And apparently the dog does not trust the place." One technician laughed politely. "Well, dogs are usually smarter than people." He clearly meant it as a joke. Ethan did not smile. Ranger suddenly stood straighter, ears forward, eyes locked hard on the gym doors again, then slowly backed away several feet. That unsettled Ethan immediately. Ranger had been trying to get close before. Now he wanted distance. Something changed, Ethan muttered quietly. Laura looked at him. "What?" Ethan watched Ranger carefully. He does not want to be near it anymore. Nobody spoke for a moment. The maintenance team disappeared inside while cold silence settled over the side yard. Wind carried the smell of pine and distant snow. Somewhere across campus, children waited inside classrooms confused about why assembly had suddenly stopped. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Ethan paced slowly near the sidewalk while Ranger remained fixed on the building. Watching, waiting. Finally, the gym doors opened suddenly. One technician stepped outside faster than before. Face pale. Expression gone. "Everybody needs to stay back," he said immediately. Laura froze. "What happened?" The man exhaled sharply. "You have a serious gas leak under the gym." Silence hit harder than anyone expected. Even wind seemed quieter somehow. "How serious?" Laura asked, voice barely above a whisper. The technician glanced back toward the building. "Very." Small pause. "There is also electrical damage near old wiring underneath." He swallowed hard. If the assembly had happened with several hundred people inside, he stopped speaking. Did not finish. He did not need to. Laura covered her mouth slowly. Tom stared at the building like he had forgotten how to move. Ethan looked down at Ranger. The old German shepherd stood perfectly calm now for the first time in days. Quiet. Still. Certain. Like something heavy had finally lifted. Emergency vehicles arrived not long after. Not dramatic. No sirens screaming. Just careful professionals moving quickly, securing the area and checking the school thoroughly. Teachers kept students indoors while staff quietly reassured nervous parents. Rumors spread faster than facts usually did in small towns. Yet one detail moved faster than everything else. The dog knew. Ethan heard it whispered before lunchtime. By teachers, parents, even maintenance workers. That dog knew. Ben Miller found Ethan near the parking lot around noon, backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder. "Did Ranger save us?" he asked quietly. Ethan looked down at the old German shepherd sitting beside him. Gray touched Ranger's muzzle, now more than before. Older, slower, yet somehow still carrying purpose stronger than time itself. Ethan crouched slightly beside the boy. "I think," he answered carefully, "he just did what he thought was right." Ben nodded seriously like children sometimes did when adults expected less understanding than they carried. He bent carefully and scratched Ranger behind the ears. "Thank you," he whispered softly. Ranger leaned gently into the touch for the first time since all this began. Calm finally replacing worry. Ethan looked across the parking lot toward the gymnasium, surrounded now by inspectors and quiet concern. then back toward Ranger. The last time the old dog had looked this uneasy, men had barely made it home. Today, hundreds of children walked safely back to class instead, and for the first time in years, Ethan quietly wondered if maybe purpose had found them again. Small towns change slowly most of the time, but sometimes, all it took was one impossible story for everything to shift overnight. By the following morning, Pine Ridge Elementary felt different. Quieter somehow. Softer. The gymnasium remained closed behind temporary caution tape, while inspectors moved carefully through the building checking systems nobody had thought much about before. Parents lingered longer during morning drop-off. Teachers spoke in lower voices. People looked at ordinary things differently now. Air vents. Old walls. Utility doors nobody noticed until something nearly happened beneath them. But the biggest change waited near the front office every morning around 8 o'clock. Ranger. Ethan Walker had not planned to come back. At least not right away. Yet something strange happened after the school incident. The silence inside his ranch house no longer felt comforting. Too quiet again. Too empty. Ranger seemed restless too, though not in the same worried way as before. The old German shepherd had finally slept through the night after the emergency inspection, stretched peacefully near the fireplace like some invisible burden had finally eased. But around 7 the next morning, Ranger stood by the truck again. Waiting. Calm this time. Tail low but steady. Ethan looked at him from the kitchen doorway and shook his head slightly. You want to go back already? Ranger blinked once. That same patient look. Ethan sighed softly. Guess somebody has become popular. When they arrived at Pine Ridge Elementary, something unexpected happened. Children noticed immediately. One little girl near the front entrance gasped loudly. It is the hero dog. Within seconds, several students gathered carefully near the sidewalk, while teachers smiled from nearby doors. Ranger stayed calm through it all. Gentle. Quiet. Accepting attention in the way older dogs sometimes did when they understood affection mattered more than excitement. Ethan shifted awkwardly beside him. Attention still felt unfamiliar after years of choosing distance. Mr. Walker. Principal Laura Bennett hurried toward them carrying coffee in one hand and relief in her smile. I was hoping you would come. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Honestly, he brought me. Laura laughed softly for the first time in days. Well, I think half the school has been asking about him. She glanced down toward Ranger. And maybe about you too. Ethan looked uncomfortable immediately. Laura noticed, but kept her tone gentle. People are grateful. Ethan nodded once. Quietly. Grateful still felt strange after years spent mostly alone. Near the office entrance, colorful pieces of paper covered a bulletin board Ethan had never noticed before. Child drawings. Crayon sketches. Ranger wearing capes. Ranger standing beside schools. Ranger surrounded by smiling stick-figure children. One picture simply said in uneven handwriting, "Thank you for helping us stay safe." Ethan stood silently longer than expected. Something warm and unfamiliar moved quietly through his chest. Ranger sat beside him calmly, as if none of this surprised him at all. Ben started it, Laura said quietly. Ethan turned. Ben. Laura nodded toward a small boy standing nervously near the hallway entrance. Backpack hanging low. Same quiet eyes. Ben Miller hesitated before walking closer. Hi, he said softly. Ranger stood immediately and walked over without hesitation, tail giving the smallest movement. Ben smiled wider than Ethan had seen before. I drew one too, he whispered shyly, holding up folded paper. Ranger sat beside him patiently, while Ben carefully unfolded a picture showing a German shepherd standing in front of a school with sunlight behind him. Underneath, messy handwriting read. He listened when nobody else did. Ethan swallowed quietly. Strange how simple words sometimes landed harder than big speeches. That is really good, Ethan said. Ben looked down nervously. My mom said heroes are just people who pay attention. Small pause. I think dogs too. Ethan almost laughed softly. I think your mom sounds smart. Around lunchtime, something even stranger happened. Parents began stopping Ethan outside the school just to say thank you. A father shook his hand near the parking lot. A teacher quietly admitted she had ignored strange smells for weeks and still felt shaken. One mother wiped tears from her face while explaining her daughter had been sitting exactly where assembly chairs would have been placed. Ethan never knew what to say. Gratitude still felt heavier than loneliness somehow. But through all of it, Ranger remained calm. Different now. Peaceful. like purpose had settled back into old bones again. Around noon, Laura approached carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. "I wanted to ask you something," she said carefully. Ethan looked up. "Sure." She hesitated briefly. "Would you maybe consider visiting the school sometimes?" Ethan frowned slightly. "Me?" Laura nodded. "The kids trust Ranger." Small smile. "And honestly, they seem to trust you too." Ethan looked down toward the old German shepherd resting quietly near his boots. Years ago, purpose used to arrive through radios, orders, missions. These days he had stopped expecting purpose at all. Yet somehow, standing outside a small Colorado school with cold wind brushing through pine trees and children waving every time Ranger lifted his head, something unfamiliar quietly returned. Belonging. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, like sunlight finally reaching a place winter forgot. And though Ethan would never say it out loud yet, for the first time in years, he no longer felt quite so alone. 3 days later, winter sunlight finally broke through the clouds above Pine Ridge, painting soft gold across rooftops and patches of lingering frost near the school parking lot. The mountains stood clearer now, tall and quiet against pale blue skies that somehow made everything feel lighter. Yet for Ethan Walker, something still sat unfinished in the back of his mind. Ranger had relaxed. Mostly. The old German shepherd slept deeper again, ate normally, and no longer paced the house at night. But every time they drove near the school, Ranger still turned his head toward the gymnasium with quiet attention before finally settling again. Like part of him still listened for something nobody else could hear. By now, the story had traveled far beyond Pine Ridge Elementary. Parents talked about it at grocery stores. Teachers mentioned it during lunch breaks. Even the local diner near Main Street had started calling Ranger the school guardian, after somebody taped one of Ben Miller's drawings beside the register. Ethan tried not to think much about any of it. Attention still felt uncomfortable. Gratitude, even more so. Yet every morning Ranger still stood by the truck around 8 o'clock, quietly waiting. So Ethan kept coming back. That Thursday afternoon, Principal Laura Bennett asked Ethan to stop by after school hours. "Nothing bad," she promised over the phone. "Actually, I think you should hear something." The school looked quieter when children were gone. Empty hallways echoed differently, without laughter bouncing between lockers and classroom doors. Late sunlight stretched across polished floors while custodians cleaned classrooms one by one. Ranger walked calmly beside Ethan through the front office, tail low and relaxed. Several teachers still smiled whenever they saw him pass. Some reached down for gentle pats. Ranger accepted every one with calm patience. Older now, but somehow carrying dignity that made people lower their voices around him. Laura waited inside her office beside another man Ethan did not recognize. Mid-60s. Silver hair. Heavy winter jacket folded neatly across his lap. Thoughtful eyes behind glasses. "Ethan," Laura said softly, standing. "This is Dr. Samuel Reeves." The man stood immediately and offered his hand. "Retired military veterinary specialist," he explained. "Mostly worked with service dogs." Ethan sat slowly. Curious now. Ranger walked straight toward Dr. Reeves without hesitation and rested quietly near his chair. The older man smiled faintly. "Still observant," he said softly. "That look never really leaves them." Ethan frowned slightly. "You know dogs like him?" Dr. Reeves nodded. "Worked with military K-9 units for years." Small pause. "Especially hazard detection teams." Ethan looked surprised. "Ranger worked explosives and chemical detection," Dr. Reeves added calmly. Ethan blinked once. "Chemical." The older man nodded. "Many military dogs are cross-trained. Explosives, gas compounds, environmental danger." He leaned back slightly. "Certain leaks have distinct scents humans miss entirely." Ethan sat quietly for a second. Pieces slowly fitting together now. "So the school," Dr. Reeves nodded gently. "The gas leak likely triggered old training responses." Small pause. "But honestly?" He looked down toward Ranger thoughtfully. "His reaction sounds unusually strong." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Dr. Reeves smiled faintly. "Military dogs learn detection. But concern like you described?" He shook his head slightly. "That sounds personal." Ethan glanced toward Ranger. The old German shepherd rested calmly against the office floor, eyes half closed now. Peaceful, yet somehow still listening. "He kept trying to bring me back," Ethan said quietly. "Would not leave." Laura folded her hands together. Almost like he knew children would be inside. Silence settled softly across the room. Nobody rushed to explain what could not fully be explained. Some things lived quietly somewhere between instinct and mystery. Outside, cold wind moved through pine trees surrounding the school grounds. Somewhere in the distance, a basketball bounced faintly near the playground. Ethan looked down at Ranger longer than usual. Over the years, people called military dogs trained, disciplined, effective. But Ethan had always believed something deeper lived beneath all that. Loyalty, maybe. Or purpose. Something impossible to teach completely. Dr. Reeves smiled gently before standing. One more thing, he said quietly. Dogs like him usually retire emotionally long before physically. He looked toward Ranger again. The fact he still cared that much, small pause. That says something. Ethan swallowed quietly. Strange how simple words landed harder than expected. On the drive home later, sunset painted soft orange light across snow-covered fields while Ranger rested quietly in the passenger seat, head near the window. Ethan drove slower than usual, thinking, remembering, wondering how many moments over the years Ranger had protected people without anyone realizing. At a red light near town, Ethan reached over absent-mindedly and rested one hand against Ranger's shoulder. You never really stopped working, did you? Ranger lifted his head briefly, calm amber eyes meeting Ethan's for just a second before settling again. Quiet, steady, familiar. And somehow, for the first time since everything happened, Ethan began wondering if maybe Ranger had not only saved a school. Maybe he had quietly saved something inside Ethan too. Winter slowly loosened its grip over Pine Ridge during the weeks that followed. Snow still rested lightly along fence lines and beneath tall pine trees. But warmer afternoons had started arriving more often, carrying the quiet promise that seasons eventually changed even when people forgot they could. At Pine Ridge Elementary, life settled back into familiar rhythms. Hallway bells rang on time again. Classrooms filled with ordinary laughter. The gymnasium reopened after weeks of repairs, safer than before, stronger than anyone realized it needed to become. Yet something remained different in the school long after the caution tape disappeared. Every Wednesday morning around 9 o'clock, a familiar truck pulled quietly into the parking lot. Children spotted it almost immediately now. Ranger is here. Voices echoed through hallways before Ethan Walker even stepped out. Somehow, without planning any of it, Ranger had become part of the school. Not officially, not in some dramatic way, just quietly, naturally. Teachers invited Ethan to bring Ranger by once a week. Sometimes children read books beside him in the library. Sometimes nervous students sat with Ranger during hard mornings when life felt heavier than backpacks should have to carry. And somehow, the old German Shepherd always seemed to know exactly who needed him most. Ethan still found the attention strange. But little by little, discomfort softened into something steadier. Familiar. Warmer. One afternoon in early spring, Principal Laura Bennett stopped Ethan outside the school garden while children planted flowers nearby. I have something to show you, she said with a smile that looked suspiciously emotional. Ethan frowned slightly. That usually worries me. Laura laughed softly. Just come on. Ranger followed quietly beside them toward the front courtyard where several teachers stood waiting near a freshly planted maple tree. Beneath it sat a small wooden bench and a simple bronze plaque. Nothing dramatic. No giant ceremony. Just something quiet. Honest. Laura folded her hands together. The parents wanted to do something, she said softly. Ethan stopped walking. The plaque caught sunlight gently as clouds moved overhead. It read, in honor of quiet courage and loyal hearts. Thank you, Ranger, for reminding us that paying attention can save lives. Ethan stood still longer than expected. Words settled heavier than he thought they would. Ranger walked calmly toward the bench and sat beside it without hesitation, tail resting softly against concrete, like somehow he understood this place belonged to him now too. Nearby, Ben Miller stepped forward shyly carrying folded paper again. I made another drawing, he said quietly. Ethan crouched down slightly. Let me guess, he smiled faintly. Still Ranger? Ben nodded proudly. But this time you are in it too. Ethan blinked once, caught off guard. Ben unfolded the picture carefully. A school. A dog. A man standing nearby. Mountains behind them. Underneath, childish handwriting read, Heroes listen when something feels wrong. Ethan swallowed quietly. Funny how children sometimes understood things adults complicated too much. Laura stood beside him for a long moment. You know, she said softly. The school board wants to ask if you would consider volunteering more often. Ethan looked surprised. Doing what exactly? Being here, she answered simply. Talking with kids. Helping with safety. Letting Ranger visit. Small pause. You are good for this place. Ethan looked out across the playground where children laughed beneath warming sunlight. A few waved excitedly when they spotted Ranger. 4 years after retirement, life had felt like something closing. Smaller. Quieter. Like purpose belonged to another version of himself left somewhere far behind. Yet standing there now, listening to children laugh while Ranger rested peacefully beside a bench carrying his name, something shifted quietly inside him. Maybe purpose never disappeared. Maybe sometimes it just changed shape. Later that evening, Ethan drove slowly back toward the ranch while sunset spread warm gold across the mountains. Ranger rested comfortably in the passenger seat, older now, slower too, but peaceful in ways Ethan had not seen for years. At a stoplight near town, Ethan glanced over and smiled quietly. Guess we are not retired after all. Ranger lifted his head briefly, ears twitching once before settling again with calm certainty. Back home, cold evening air drifted softly through pine trees while stars slowly appeared above the ranch. Ethan stood on the porch longer than usual, coffee warming his hands, Ranger resting quietly nearby. Somewhere far off, town lights flickered gently against dark hills. Strange how life changed. Strange how belonging arrived when people stopped searching for it. Ethan had spent years believing loneliness was simply something a man learned to carry. But now, every Wednesday morning waited ahead like something worth showing up for. And as Ranger sighed softly beside him beneath the quiet Colorado sky, Ethan realized something simple and important. Sometimes miracles do not arrive loudly. Sometimes they sit quietly beside you, waiting for somebody to finally pay attention.